Coming up,
We are still buffeted by the failure at the state level to resolve its fiscal situation.
soon the budget battle begins again in Juneau.
So we have to make some decisions, shrink the government or take money from people. And that's what we have to decide this year.
Oil prices and production have dropped, so income is down, yet expenses are up. Ahead, a conversation with the Anchorage mayor.
Investments cannot exist without predictability and certainty.
A look beyond the numbers.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come. Bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome. In this program, we will talk about the future of Alaska and the city of Anchorage. Mayor Ethan Berkowitz will join us in this program to talk about that. But first, the big news. Governor Mike Dunleavy released his budget on December 11th, 4 days ahead of the statutory deadline. He called it a springboard for future discussions.
A lot of work went into the budget.
The governor spoke for about 11 and a half minutes to reporters and then left for what his press secretary said was a prior commitment. He did not say what that was. Before the governor departed, he said the budget has no spending increases and there are no plans for schools to be cut. For now, he is balancing the budget gap with $1.5 billion from a state savings account that would leave about $500 million unspent. The governor says he will leave it to the legislature to decide what to be cut to close the state's budget gap, and he wants Alaskans to weigh in.
I plan on going out and having meetings with Alaskans in as many communities as possible starting in January to hear what their feedback is in terms of what do they want Alaska to look like going forward. What kind of programs do they want? What kind of services do they want? And how are we going to go about paying for those services?
State revenues are lower than expected. The spring forecast was about $5.3 billion. That's down about $300 million. As for production, the state revenue outlook is based on the North Slope oil production forecast, which is down for next year and isn't expected to come up to this year's production levels until 2029. Now, the governor says, despite that, he wants to pay a full permanent fund dividend based on the traditional formula, which would be around $3,000. And he also says he wants a $1,400 supplemental dividend to make up for past dividends that were reduced. And joining us now to talk about the state budget and the impacts on local governments, the mayor of Anchorage, Ethan Berkowitz. First of all, your reaction to the governor's plan to pay a full dividend and not tap the earnings, at least until there can be some legislation that brings it to a vote of the people.
So I think the fundamentals of when you propose a budget, particularly at the state level, it has to be something sustainable and it has to do something that's responsive to the responsibilities that we have. And the idea that we're going to put a dividend first before we satisfy the state's other responsibilities, in my mind, is neither sustainable nor responsible. I think Alaska, in sum, is much more than the size of our dividend. And if we sacrifice what Alaska is supposed to be and what Alaska can be in order to pay out a big dividend, not only are we shorting our future, we're also enriching the federal government. Because what people don't recognize is that approximately 20 to 25% of the dividend payout in aggregate goes to the federal government as federal income tax. I think there are preferable alternatives that make Alaska a stronger place fiscally to be and puts us in a better position so that we can take advantage of all the opportunities that exist in our state.
Well, one of the things, that the governor has said is, it's better to put the money in the people's pocket than government's pocket.
But he's putting money in the federal government's pocket. That's not a good thing to do. And I hear an awful lot of talk about my dividend. I want to hear more discussion about our schools, our roads, our troopers, our infrastructure. Because in a lot of ways, when I hear the idea that we're going to pay out a big dividend, I'm reminded of the biblical story of Esau. And as you recall, Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup. And if we trade Alaska's future for a big dividend this year and reduce our ability to pay out dividends in the future, reduce our ability to have a quality education, reduce our ability to have the kind of quality infrastructure that we need in order to be competitive, in order to sustain the quality of life that we should have, I think that's shorting our future.
Well, the governor says that it may be okay to tap the earnings of the permanent fund just so long as the people have a say in that. Give the legislature permission to do that.
You know, I haven't scoured this particular budget, but I listened to the rollout, and it struck me that this was just another instance of pushing responsibility to other people. What the governor did here was basically say, I'm going to let the legislature put a budget together. And the governor basically abdicated his responsibility of leadership.
But why not let the legislature work it out?
Because when you are hired as the chief executive for your government, then you are supposed to lead. And, you know, I just remember Harry Truman had that sign on his desk, the buck stops here. Well, the proposal that Governor Dunleavy laid out yesterday basically took that sign and put it over in the House and in the Senate, and that's not leadership.
Well, he had a bad time last year. A recall movement resulted after he took leadership and made a lot of steep budget cuts. So maybe, do you think that's had an impact on saying, well, let's let the legislature work this out?
Well, I know that if you want to stand tall, you got to stand in. And pushing the responsibility to other people is neither standing in nor standing tall.
Okay, well, one of the things I want to look at is, you know, how the city of Anchorage has dealt with, you know, the reduced funding over the years. And, you know, we have a graphic here that shows you how much the state got years ago. About 40% of its budget in 1986 from state funding, down to 1%. So what have you done to close this gap?
Yeah, and this is something that's happened over time. I think it's something the framers of the Alaska Constitution envisioned, is that we started off where the state government was much stronger in a much better position, and local government wasn't in that position. And so we were supposed to devolve power and responsibility to local government. And in the mid-'80s, approximately 40 to 45% of Anchorage's budget was directly funded by the state. Now we're at 1%. What we've done to bridge that gap is we've had to raise taxes locally. We have had to cut services significantly, and we have had to do a lot less with a lot less.
So let's look at the population numbers, because you're doing a lot less with a lot less, but you have a lot more people compared to 1986.
Mm-hmm. And some of the things we've done, and it's not just my administration, it's the administrations prior to us, is we used to have a very heavy bond debt requirement. In the mid-'80s, approximately the average taxpayer had about $450 to $470 worth of per capita bonded indebtedness. Now we're down to about $150 per capita. That's a strengthening economy. You've looked at the property value in Anchorage has tripled over that time, from about 10 to 12 billion to about 35 plus billion dollars of property value. So there are many positive things that are occurring in Anchorage right now.
But before we go to a break, I want to ask you one thing: is Anchorage has more tools at its disposal to adjust to less revenue. What about the smaller communities?
Yeah, Anchorage is very fortunate. I mean, we have our own trust fund, which was going to be enhanced by the sale of municipal light and power. But the smaller communities are in a much more desperate situation. And the smaller communities, particularly the villages across Alaska, have been buffeted by budget cuts and budget restrictions for generations. And that does them a massive disservice. This is why the solution that should happen for not just Anchorage, but for all the communities, would involve something that I would hope would be a community dividend. We, as Alaskans, we are at our best when we do things together. If we are siloed, if we are separated, and if the politics of division are put upon us, that makes us less than we're supposed to be.
All right, Ethan. Well, we'll hear more from Ethan Berkowitz when we come back, and we'll look at the impact of the budget on the economy and the city of Anchorage, so stay with us.
Frontiers is sponsored by Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, providing the highest quality health services for Alaska Native people at the Alaska Native Medical Center and across Alaska.
The Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium improves health for all Alaska Native people. We pioneered telehealth across the state and offer high-quality medical care with housing and services available for rural patients. In our communities, we construct systems for our water and our environment and focus on prevention. We're supporting Alaska Native Health. Our vision is that Alaska Native people are the healthiest people in the world.
We talked with the governor on his one-year anniversary about the impact of last year's budget cuts, some of the deepest in the state's history. He says he believes that they haven't hurt the economy.
And many people said that that would ruin Alaska. That's going to destroy Alaska. It's going to destroy the economy. As of today, the economic indicators tell a different story. The economic indicators across the board, unemployment rates, GDP growth, personal income growth, investment, they're all up. Now, trust me, I'm not taking credit for all of those things happening, but what I was told by some in response to the reductions, that those reductions would tank the economy. You just throw us back in the recession, it's going to be awful. What I'm trying to say is, it appears that the growing economy has absorbed these reductions. It would appear that the end of the world scenario has not manifested itself.
Well, Mayor Ethan Berkowitz is back with us. You know, what's your reaction to that statement that there doesn't seem so far to be a correlation between budget cuts and the economy? Because he says it's pretty solid right now. How do you think it's more fragile than those numbers would lead us to believe?
You don't have to look at my opinion on this. Look at what the rating agencies are saying. And Fitch, just yesterday, earlier this week, came out and said that Alaska's on the verge of being downgraded if we're to go through with what Governor Dunleavy's proposing. That's what a qualified financial expert thinks about what the governor's plans are. I will tell you that there's been a hollowing out of the economy. You look at commercial real estate vacancy rates, you look at the vacancy rates for rental property in Anchorage, and those numbers are starting to go up. The value of properties are starting to come down. The amount of retail that's existing in our community is declining. So there is a hollowing out of the Alaskan economy that's occurring right now. And I will tell you that there's some long-term dangers that are particularly caused by the cuts to the university, because if we want to have control of our destiny as a resource development state, then we need to train people in Alaska to manage our resources and to provide the services that a community needs. And cuts to the university put us in a much weaker position into the future.
Well, there are some bright spots. And, you know, I've heard that building permits have increased despite all of this.
Well, the amount of building permits are running about 115% of where they were last year. Some of that's attributable to the earthquake, about 5% of that. But I think a lot of it reflects the fact that here in Anchorage, in spite of what's happening at the state level, we've maintained our high credit rating, our AAA bond rating. We have run balanced budgets, which we are supposed to do, and we have helped create the kind of conditions that have led to construction. I mean, we've seen...
Well, let's look at this place, Elizabeth Place. It just opened up. What is special about this development project? It's downtown.
This is the first downtown housing project that has opened in almost 30 years. And that is a huge advantage, because what we're trying to signal is that downtown is a place where people should be living, and if it's open 24/7, then you will have good activity crowding out bad activity. And all communities, all cities that are vibrant have a vibrant downtown. And we have taken a number of initiatives, and Elizabeth Place is one of the benefits of it.
And also, it has low-income housing, right? So
it is a mixed-use facility, but you've got that. You've got the Downtown Edge coming online, which is something that's done with the private developers in conjunction with the railroad. We have a number of other projects that are in the queue, so we're feeling very optimistic.
So it's not just the luxury condos.
No, there's a lot of what's called workforce housing that's a possibility.
Why is that so important?
It's important because you want to have neighborhoods that people like living in and that are walkable. And downtown in particular, if you want a vital city, and you look at cities across the world, they have vital downtowns. They don't empty out at 5 o'clock when the workday ends. You want people to live there throughout the day. And there's a greater demand, particularly for millennials and people who are graying up, my generation, to live in a downtown area where you can just walk places. That's
really encouraging to hear that there are more options, for people that, maybe are a waitress or a waiter at one of the restaurants downtown, that they can afford something and not have to commute. But one of the things, though, that you know, with the earthquake anniversary, there was a lot of talk about the port, that it is still very vulnerable, that we were very lucky that it withstood a magnitude 7 quake, 7.1 quake. So what is in the works for the port?
So the port is really a story of in 4 parts. One is the petroleum cement terminal. That is in 100% design. We have the funding for it. In the next couple of days, hopefully the Assembly will pass the tariff requirements so we can go forward with complete construction. And we expect, if things go according to plan, for that piece of the port to be done by 2021. The cargo facilities are a work in progress, and we're working with the primary cargo movers, Tote and Matson, as well as the others, to come up to a full design in a way that is sustainable into the future.
But how are we going to pay for this, though? I mean, you got some of it paid for, but if we don't get this taken care of, we may not be as lucky next time.
As you know, unfortunately, Alaskans are coming to grips with the idea that the free ride is over, that we're going to have to start to pay for things ourselves. And we're hoping that there will be continued federal assistance, because part of the port is it's a military strategic port. We are hoping to have a settlement with our suit against the federal government based on the problems they created with the past port expansion. But we're going to have to probably raise some tariffs, and we're going to look to the state government for general obligation bonds, which is only appropriate since so much of state construction, so much of state material passes through the port that we call it the Port of Alaska, that is in Anchorage.
So I hear that the Assembly is pushing for another vote on an alcohol tax.
And I commend them for doing that. I supported the alcohol tax last year, and I will support it again this year. One of the responsibilities that we have in Anchorage is to make sure that we're on a secure financial footing, and the alcohol tax is a piece of that equation. And I believe that cost causers should be cost payers. And alcohol, the alcohol industry generates about $800 million of cost in Anchorage per year, and we do not have a direct benefit from that.
So getting the alcohol tax in has been pushed as a way to address the homelessness issues, which largely involve addictions.
Well, homelessness is a symptom of other problems that exist in a community. I mean, the problem that it reveals in this case is that we have a lack of drug and alcohol treatment, that we have a lack of mental health treatment that we once used to have. And we have fewer treatment beds in Anchorage today than we did 30 years ago. We have gone backwards. And some of this is due to changes at the state level, some of it's due to changes at the federal level. It is a problem that is national in scope. If it were not national in scope, we would be the only city in the country that experienced homelessness. But in fact, that our response to homelessness has led to better results than most other places, and other cities across particularly the West, are looking at the things we're doing to copy our success strategies.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about before we go away to our next break is the crime situation. We have seen homicides climbing up, but at this point we've got 33. We're ahead of last year. There was an all-time record of 37. What's happening with that?
You know, Alaska has long had a terrible problem with domestic violence and sexual assault, and unfortunately those numbers continue to grow.
So are you saying they're a huge driver in the homicides?
Yes, domestic violence is a significant contributor to the number of homicides that exist. Most of the others relate to drug trafficking, and they tend to be focused around the drug trade.
What about the police force? And we have some numbers so that people can see how many police we have compared to other cities comparable to our size. So we still have a ways to go to meet that level.
Yes, we're about 400 and some odd officers right now. We should have about 600 plus.
Can we ever get there, though?
Well, we can't get there with the current tax cap that's in place. But I think that if we view public safety is far more than just what exists through law enforcement, and we need to have a more comprehensive view about what's required to make Anchorage a safer community. Some of it has to do with drug and alcohol issues. Some of it, the prevention component is significant. Some of it has to do with the prosecution piece. The state, which prosecutes felonies in Anchorage, has seen its felony prosecutions, its unit draw down significantly due to budget cuts. Some of it has to do with what we do when people are in corrections. Do we provide the kind of treatment that's necessary so they don't relapse into the same kind of bad behavior? And that, unfortunately, hasn't happened. I mean, the consequence of budget cuts are visited upon the people of Anchorage every day because of folks being out on the street who shouldn't be out on the street.
So we're going to leave it there for a moment. We'll go one more round with the mayor. When we come back, we'll talk about how do you have a vision of the future when there's so much uncertainty. And we are back with Mayor Ethan Berkowitz. And now you are in the last stretch of your term. What, 18 months left?
It's a quarter of it still. So.
Still, okay, but it's kind of that time when you start to wrap up and lay the foundation for the next mayor. But I thought I'd like to ask you, like, what's at the top of your to-do list?
We want to finish a lot of the things that we started. Finishing the MLMP sale is really important. Making sure that the port is in a good trajectory so we can hand that off in a firm way. I want to work more on the waste to energy facilities so that we can reduce the costs moving ahead, make sure that we're able to generate powers. But I also want to continue with the efforts that we have to make Anchorage a more welcoming and more resilient city, because as we do that, we are a more attractive place for people to live.
So I want to pull a quote, I guess, that you apparently have a favorite quote that you tell your employees about. It's "take me out past where I can see." So what's that all about?
There's a nautical origin to that. Is, you know, if you stay too close to land, you're not going to discover anything new. And I ask people to take me out past where I can see, because I have incredible confidence in the people that work for the municipality and believe in their entrepreneurial spirit, that they can figure out what to do, and that if they're given the discretion to innovate, they will come up with great solutions. And I've seen that time and again.
So what have you seen when they've taken you out past where you can see?
I mean, right now, just yesterday, someone was talking to me about a proposal to put Wi-Fi on the buses. This is something that I didn't have a hand in doing, but the folks that are running transit got together with the folks at the IT department and came up with this kind of concept, and they're going to pursue it. But it's more basic than that. You look at the folks that are doing street maintenance. We're able to, because people who do street maintenance and are running the plows out there, they've been able to make their own equipment. They've been able to do things so that they can clear a street and also make sure that they don't leave a berm in a driveway because of the inventions that happen here.
One last question. I was struck when I went to your city manager's office, Bill Falsey's office, and I saw this painting kind of in a prominent place. You've seen it, haven't you? There's a picture of an artist who is painting a bird by looking at the egg. He's trying to envision it. You know, it's sort of a vision statement. What does that painting say to you?
It says that you need to know where you want to go and have a sense of what the future is all about. And Alaska got to be Alaska because we had strong visionary leaders, people like Wally Hickel and Jay Hammond and Ted Stevens, great Native leaders, and they had a vision of what Alaska could be all about. And I think it's the responsibility of this generation and the next generation to carry on with that idea of vision. I'm going to, since we're coming to a close here, Wally Hickel used to say that if your sole vision is to cut the budget, then Alaska has no hope and no future. And Alaska has to have a vision that's bigger than a single budget.
Or a permanent fund dividend check, maybe.
And bigger than a permanent fund dividend.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mayor Ethan Berkowitz. Finally, we love it when we get contributions from our viewers. This is a photo of a Siberian larch tree that comes to us from Joy Shantz of Bethel. She shot this on the morning of December 4th, just as the sun was coming up over the Bethel horizon. And by the way, there's no star on that tree. It's the sun rising behind the tree. She calls the photo Miracle Morning. And continuing on the vein of mornings, we're going to leave you now with footage from an early morning jog with women who stay at the shelter at the Downtown Hope Center. They have called their group Running for Hope, and they hit the pavement 3 times a week. This video was shot by KTVA's John Thane and set to music composed and performed by Harrison Jennings, an Anchorage mandolin player. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
We're here. We're ready to roll. You guys just conquered the hardest part.
You're walkers today, huh?
Yeah.
I need something to do in the morning.